Okay, while we wait for people to come in, because I see people are getting off the elevator and stuff too. How's your day going? Yeah? Okay, so what brings you right after lunch to a panel called The Dark Side?
Well, it is the month of Halloween.
It is the month of Halloween. My name is Melanie Mills, and I teach here at Eastern in the Communication Studies Department. I have been doing workshops on dealing with difficult people for 30 years, and they have changed a lot in recent years. I do a lot of talks in the dorms, and you know, because sometimes a difficult person's your roommate, sometimes it's your boss, sometimes it's your family member. And so, you know, a lot of the information that I'm going to talk about today has a really broad context. A lot of difficult behaviors have only recently been called bullying more explicitly. Okay, so while there have always been bullies, there is a lot of attention paid more recently, and if you follow this literature, you know that it's exploding, right? So what I would like to talk to you about today are some of the things that are not new. All right, these are some foundational ideas in my field of communication that address developing problems in relationships, and by problems in relationships I mean communication that hurts, all right, communication that is more than conflict, all right, because not every conflict or disagreement counts as bullying, and you've probably heard other speakers today talk about how important it is to recognize the difference, so that not every disagreement I have with someone, or not everybody who's mean to me necessarily, particularly if it's a one-time thing, that doesn't count as bullying. All right, so what does count as bullying then? How do you understand bullying? It's something that, what's different about bullying than other difficult? Repeated and deliberate. Repeated and deliberate. Okay, intention is an important part of it, whether or not we perceive that people mean to be mean. Okay, do we all know of examples of somebody who was well-intended and happened to be interpreted as mean? Okay, that may or may not count as bullying, because ignorance is no excuse, right? Okay, so sometimes we have bullying behaviors going on and people don't recognize that they're doing it, but very oftentimes they do, and it's intentional, right? Really, to move from, you know, just mean behaviors or difficult behaviors to bullying territory also involves repetition. So it's somebody who is repeatedly addressed in a way that creates a difficult interpersonal session. One of the other presenters, Angie Jacobs, and I have for the last several years focused a lot of our work in communication on communication that hurts to the point of people wanting to hurt themselves. So we do a lot of work in education classes here on campus to talk about bullying as it relates to difficult outcomes, particularly suicide. Now, I'm not going to focus on suicide today, but I give you that example to show that that is the worst outcome possible, and that it is a possibility. You know, there are a lot of times, particularly for children who are not cognitively developed enough to recognize that they have choices that you and I might recognize that they have, as a response to difficult and very painful behaviors. It's also true that bullies are very often bullied, right? So very oftentimes somebody who you might identify as a bully is also a victim. So it's not so simple to divide the world into bullies and bullied, right? Because it's very, very often the case that hurting people hurt people, right? And sometimes that hurt comes out in bullying. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about why. Why do we do that? What's in it? You know, what's in it for us? Why on earth would somebody choose to be a bully? I mean, gosh, we got a whole conference here devoted to stamping out bullying, and stuff. So why would anybody want to do that? What do you think? Why on earth would anybody? Power. Okay, is one answer. Is that the only answer though? There's lots.
I guess maybe it kind of goes along with, but a lot of the students at our school, I was with an alternative program, said that they bullied because they had been bullied, so they were doing it first.
Right. So sometimes it's a defense mechanism.
Social status.
Social status. Okay. Which,
They may not know better.
they may not know better. It may be the role model they have at home. We don't. It'd be great if everybody came from totally functional and loving families, but the fact is, and you know it better than anybody, that's not true all the time. Okay. In the study of interpersonal communication, one of the places we go to understand what motivates people to do what they do and say what they say is the area of needs and having your needs met. And you guys just covered, just hit on all three of the interpersonal needs that I'm going to address today, which are also listed on your paper. How many of you have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Okay. How many of you have heard of William Schutz? Okay, well, good thing I'm not talking about Maslow today. Maslow and Schutz were colleagues together up the road here at the University of Chicago. And they both were prominent in their time, and their time was 50, 60 years ago. And in studying what motivates people according to their needs. Okay, so Maslow's hierarchy of needs includes what kind of stuff? Basic needs for shelter, food, sustenance, stuff like that. And then you've got that little triangle thing. What's at the top?
Self-actualization.
Self-actualization, which means I feel, I'm lovable, I am capable, I am, because also, if you're old enough to remember the time when these things were around, that's also the time of encounter groups, okay, where this whole, I'm lovable, I'm capable, and
You're okay.
I'm okay, you're okay, kind of what in my field we call interpersonal, touchy-feely, weenie stuff. Because the reason we do that is because it hurt our academic credibility sometimes to study soft stuff like that. Okay, so it had a mixed reputation at the time that it was developed, and that's probably why you've never heard of William Schutz. Okay, he was a contemporary of Maslow's. The two of them worked together, and what Schutz did was he focused on interpersonal needs. Okay, so instead of looking at needs as holistically as Maslow did, he looked at needs in terms of what are our personal needs that we can only get satisfied in our relationships with other people, okay, that have a huge effect on how we choose to be with other people. Okay. And what it was the beginning of, and that's partly why I picked him, is because I'm giving credit to the roots here. This is kind of the roots of the beginning to talk about how we engage in communication with others to meet interpersonal needs. Okay, so those needs are listed here. They are inclusion, affection, and control. Okay, so somebody had mentioned that sometimes people bully to belong. Okay, and in fact, we had a presentation today with that title, right? Anybody there? Inclusion is being in or out of a social group, and sometimes we will make behavioral choices, say things and do things that we think will get us in with a certain group of people that we want to be in with. Okay, and this is true not only of children, but it's also true of adults. Right, so if our inclusion needs are not met in a healthy way, all right, then you might find, the example I like to use with my students is, do you ever watch a tree grow that has something laid over the top of it? What happens to it? It grows anyway, okay? It satisfies its need. And sometimes it's twisted in the process, and sometimes it gets ugly, okay, and it doesn't, look like a good vine tree, pick your metaphor, right? But it will go on because it will have its needs satisfied, okay? And that happens sometimes when our interpersonal needs aren't met the way ideally we'd like to see people's needs met, okay? So that need for inclusion, I know I have 3 daughters, and I worried about them a lot through the teen years, and part of the reason for that was because that need for inclusion is so huge, and it's simultaneously at a time when your need for independence is also huge. So your family, which might have been your source for meeting your inclusion needs before, is so not cool, right? And when we cut, we cut loose our families, then we meet our inclusion needs because we do have needs to belong. Human beings are social animals. We need to connect to other people. Now, do we all do it the same way? No. Do we all have the same needs in terms of numbers of people in our lives? No. But what William Schutz says is we do all have a basic need to belong because we are affiliative creatures. Okay, which means we don't play the Lone Ranger very well. We don't do well without contact with somebody who includes us. Okay, someplace we belong. We all need that. Okay. The second need is a need for affection. I really wish he'd called this something else because affection, particularly when you talk about it with kids, they think romance and that kind of thing, and it often goes to a physical place. Affection is really more about liking. We all have a need to like other people and also to be liked by other people. It's related to inclusion, but it is a separate need, okay? It's an intimacy need. We need to be understood as unique human beings, okay?
Are you talking about the need for confidants as opposed to general friends?
Everybody wants to feel special to somebody, okay? So I am talking about intimacy, so getting past acquaintances, so it's not just I have a lot of friends on Facebook kind of thing, to I have somebody I can call in the middle of the night. I have somebody who cares about me, that I care about too. I mean, we need to know that we are worthy of that kind of special relational engagement, okay? So it's, beyond the number of people you know to having people you feel close to, okay? And sometimes it would surprise you. Sometimes it's very interesting to look at reports of people in schools and you'd say, oh, that's a popular kid. Of course their affection needs are met. Everybody likes them. And then that's the kid who commits suicide. And you go, whoa, how did that happen, right? And what that means is that our measuring stick might not be very good to understand people's needs. Okay, so part of what I'm doing here, I only have 50 minutes, so we can't solve all the world's problems. But if we, learn some different ways of thinking about how we might start recognizing things and looking at things to say, well, what's not working? And is this a possible explanation? And if it is, how can I use this understanding of this person who I see as either being a bully or being in trouble with a bully? How can I meet their needs, right? Developing relationships with others is not just an incidental thing, it is a critical part of being human. And sometimes we say, oh, that's not the most important thing. Well, sometimes it is, okay? The final interpersonal need is a need for control. And that is not just a need to have control over our own lives, okay, which is part of it. We need to feel like we have some say about what happens in our lives. Like we have some say, we have some agency to address and handle our own decisions, okay? Make our own relationships and so forth. Okay, but it also refers to a need to know that we matter enough that we can affect others' behaviors. Okay, and this is where we kind of get our wires crossed and things go haywire sometimes. Because if my control needs aren't met, then I might try to inappropriately control somebody else. All right, it's an area of study that is huge when you look at violence in relationships, abusive relationships, and dysfunctional families. So that control thing, which is something somebody mentioned at the front as a motivator for bullies. You know, sometimes we think that's because they're powerful. Is it? Maybe it's because they aren't powerful and seek to have their control needs met. All right. So sometimes, you know, we have talked to a number of people who will say, "Oh my gosh, I'm a bully. I don't like that identity. What can I do?" Well, one of the things you can do is start to examine what bullying's doing for you. What's in it for the bully, right? Because maybe it's a twisted way of accomplishing meeting a need. All right. This is kind of old information, but it is still relevant. You know, so one of the things I tell my students all the time is to, you know, check and see if information withstands the test of time. And some things in interpersonal relationships, you know, come and go. All right. A lot of our understandings about how men and women relate, for example, have changed a lot in the last 50 years. The interpersonal needs idea has not changed. How we meet our needs changes, okay? But the fact that we have them has been pretty solid. I've got a quote on your handout from William Schutz's obituary. He died in his 80s. He spent most of his career advancing this idea of meeting needs in both personal relationships and professional relationships, because a lot of our professional relationships are personal too, right? He spent a lot of his consulting time showing people in workplaces how these bad behaviors to meet needs cost organizations money. Now, I know we had a presentation this morning from Dr. Bakir about the economic cost of bullying. That's true, you know, that's true personally and professionally too, and it's definitely true in our schools, because the time we spend dealing with bullying behaviors is time that is not free, right? It's, you know, there's time costs, there's opportunity costs, and then there's always the dollars associated with those things too, right? I think it's interesting that he was, as I quote here in the obituary, fiercely dedicated to lowering the defense costs of doing business, okay, with these negative behaviors, okay, which occur very often because we have needs that need to be met, okay. So one thing we need to consider is if our needs are not being met in a way that is respectful of other people around us, then how do we change our our classroom communities? How do we change what's going on in our schools? How do we change bullying behavior to make it not cool? All right, it's a big order, isn't it? How many of you in here are teachers? Just so I can kind of get a feel for this. Why are the rest of you here? PDR sheet, okay, that's honest. Are you in education though? Yes. Okay. Let me word the question differently then. How many of you are in education professionally? Okay, more hands. All right, so I'm guessing maybe counselors as well as teachers, perhaps. We got some interested parents, community members. Okay, you know, one of the things that is really critical, teachers take a lot of abuse in the news, in the sense that, you know, we get a lot of reports from different groups of people that say teachers aren't doing enough. Okay, well, as a teacher, I'd say I can't do everything you want me to do, right? So part of the impetus for this conference is dealing with that tension, right? We said, you know, teachers shouldn't have to do it alone because, you know, a lot of the problems come to us from outside our sphere of influence, okay? So there are problems related to families. There are problems related to kid relationships with one another. And that's always been a part of hanging out at school. But you know, it's changing all the time. Cyberbullying is an example. You know, when I was a kid, you didn't have cyberbullying. So, you know, if you had trouble at school with a bully, you could at least look forward to part of the day when you could go home and have some freedom to not be tense, not worry, not feel threatened. Well, that's not true for kids in school today. And it's made a big difference. The suicide numbers have ramped up with cyberbullying in particular. It's, I mean, it's just insidious. And you got to think that, you know, the ideas that we have as adults are things we can't conceive of as kids. We cognitively developed over time to recognize choices that our students don't always see. So it is critical for us to be able to see and help with some of those things. Okay, I'm going to shift gears to go to another concept. Okay, I think the concept of interpersonal needs is something important to have in your toolbox. Okay, because a lot of our behaviors, a lot of our choices, whether we recognize it intentionally or not, are things that we do to meet our needs. Okay, so as somebody who is potentially in a position to intervene, one of the questions that we might ask is, what needs are being met by this behavior that we're calling unacceptable? Okay, because if you take it away, how can you increase the likelihood that it will not come back? By meeting the need another way, right? Okay, so, you know, so that's what you can do with the idea of interpersonal needs. The other classic communication issue is the idea of defensiveness. You know, a lot of times bad behavior, difficult behavior makes us feel defensive, right? Okay, so what does defensiveness feel like? When you feel defensive, what's it feel like? What's going on in your body? How does it feel? Tense, okay. So you've got some tension. Where's the tension is in your muscles. What else is going on in your body? Your adrenaline, okay. You got that fight, flight thing going on. So you have an adrenaline response. What else?
Heart rate.
Your heart rate goes up. It's not a peaceful experience, is it? Okay, I mean, is defensiveness and peace mutual? I mean, is that mutually possible? Generally not. Okay, so defensiveness and feeling defensive is an emotion that can steal your joy, right? And particularly for people who feel constantly like they need to protect themselves, they feel constantly threatened. This feeling of defensiveness, it has a physical impact, it has an emotional impact, and it affects our ability to develop good relationships. Okay, so there's a guy in 1961 named Jack Gibb who wrote what is now a classic article in the Journal of Communication, and my students love this article because it's only 6 pages long. Okay, which is unusual for academic writing. It's very succinct, but it's a neat typology that I've put down there for you, of a list of 6 behaviors that cause that defensiveness, and 6 behaviors, corresponding behaviors, which are more supportive. Okay, and the more defensive, and here's the thing about defensiveness. When somebody makes you feel defensive, what do you want to do? What's your first impulse?
Attack.
Attack. Or withdraw. Are you prepared to listen well and be open to their ideas, negotiate alternative ways? No. You know, I either want to smack you or I want to get away from you, right? Okay? So supportiveness doesn't happen. when we are in a defensive moment. Okay, now, do all of us have the same things that trip our defensive trigger? You know, so there are some people who feel incredibly well-intentioned about their behaviors that cause other people a great deal of discomfort. All right, how many of you have seen the news anchor last week who was, I think she's from over around St. Louis. I'm seeing some people nod. Okay, she's a larger woman who felt attacked by an email that she got from a viewer. Okay, now if you take, so you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, if you take the words in that email, the words indicate concern for her. And I'm sure if you ask that guy, and that may show up here somewhere later, he thought he might be doing a good deed. Okay, I missed that. I haven't seen his response. Okay, but I'm sure he, would argue that he was, good deed doing. She needed to know this. Okay, and as she pointed out, though, you think I don't know my size? Was it necessary to call attention to it? Some of the debates that I was listening to about that, this is National Bullying Month. She called it bullying. She responded to him. She was very articulate in her response to him and so forth. But, I had conversations with a number of experts on bullying and said, I'm not sure that was bullying. Why? Is this ongoing? It's one email, okay? Which I think points to what happens when we label a behavior a particular thing. We treat it as if it were that thing, right? So, I think that example, while it's a good behavior of addressing a difficult issue, might not be a good example of bullying unless it is ongoing.
Wasn't it representative, though, of a lot of other similar incidents?
It wasn't connected for that person, to have an ongoing, the bullying happens in a relationship, okay? And relationships are developed through back and forth, okay? And the caution for using one message things or one-time things and calling them bullying is that, there are opportunities for addressing bad behaviors that are different once you start calling them bullying, okay? Especially in the schools, because at school, when we start calling something bullying, then what kicks in? Most schools have an anti-bullying policy, right? Okay, then you're covered under that policy, and that might be constricting for you. Okay, it might be a constraint. So something could easily get blown up that possibly, and I'm not saying always, but I'm saying possibly, could have been dealt with differently with different language. Okay, just say this is a difficult behavior, it needs to stop before we call it this thing that's now covered under a policy. Okay, see the difference? Okay, so I'm going to buzz through these definitions real quick. Defensive behaviors are easy to recognize. We usually recognize them with our guts. And defensive behaviors are contagious. So, you make me feel defensive. I have this strong, almost innate desire to make you feel defensive back. And that responsiveness is particularly true as we are maturing, And even once we hit whatever threshold we want to call maturity, like I am now mature, right? Even then, do we sometimes get tempted to have some of those immature, hissy fit sorts of emotional responses that aren't productive for anybody, but man, they felt good, right? Okay, so, it's, if we have those impulses, don't kids, right? Okay, so evaluative behaviors are judgmental words, and I'm going to go back and forth with these and treat them as pairs. The evaluation behaviors imply some sort of negative judgment. It's usually personal. Okay, so the kind of personal judgment that news anchor felt for her size. There are certain predictable things that people pick on each other for. Okay, that have negative social. Negative social identity markers that that you know are going to get a rise out of somebody. So if you got a control need, you can pretty well be sure that, somebody will respond to this, right? Okay. And now this doesn't mean that we should quit being honest with one another or critical of one another. It means that we need to pay attention to the way we do it, because you can be critical without creating defensiveness. And evaluation behaviors, on the other hand, on the supportive side, are the way you do that. So you disagree with an idea rather than attacking a person. Okay? So, hit hard on the issue and easy on the person is what I usually tell roommates who want to talk to me about, their insensitive, horrible roommate who never does her share of the dishes and stuff like that, right? You want to address something that's causing you conflict or dissatisfaction in the relationship somehow. You can do it by going hard on the issue. This is not fair. This is not equal. We share equally in this relationship, and you are taking advantage of me when you blah, 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 okay? So you've got specific information to work with other than saying, you're just such a jerk or a slob, or fill in your, favorite negative adjective there, right? Because that's different when we call people names, okay? And evaluative behaviors, name calling is a perfect example of it. We respond to that. I mean, it has meaning for us that says, you are negatively evaluating me. Okay. The next pair is control and problem orientation. We've already talked about control as an interpersonal need, but controlling behaviors are calling unnecessary attention to power, using power inappropriately. A problem orientation, on the other hand, is we together have an issue. How do we together solve it, rather than a my way or the highway kind of control issue. This comes up a lot in relationships, particularly. I do relationship workshops in the dorms, especially the freshman dorm. I get a lot of this power stuff going on. So you want to be my girlfriend, you want to be my boyfriend, then you have to, X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah. Well, really, we're going to call that love? Okay, well, not until we mutually negotiate it are we really going to call it love, right? Okay, so that's an example of that pair. The third pair is superiority and equality. Are we all equal? Do we all have the same talents, skills, abilities, opportunities? No. Okay, so equality doesn't mean that we should look at everybody as exactly the same, because we're not. All right, but superiority behaviors are those behaviors that call attention to status differences unnecessarily. Okay, so if I walked into this room and said, hello people, little people, my name is Dr. Melanie Mills, PhD. I mean, do you like me very much? I'm a jerk, right? Why? Because I'm calling unnecessary attention to my particular area of expertise in this room, right? Is that necessary for us to have a conversation about communication and have credibility? I don't need to do that for credibility, right? In fact, if I do that, it might cause you to question my credibility, actually, so it's not a very effective strategy, okay? But it is an attempt at sending you a message about your place in this relationship we develop, which is why I didn't come in here and do that. Okay, equality refers more to equal status as human beings, that we all deserve a certain measure of respect and civility as we interact with one another as human beings. Okay, and it goes a long way toward creating a respectful work culture. Okay, and that's true in our classrooms, in our families, and in cross relationships, okay? Especially in the classroom, there's an unequal distribution of power. I mean, in the classroom, who has the power? Who's supposed to have the power? Teachers, okay? So students will say, oh, do they sometimes have an impression that they get picked on? Okay, do teachers ever have the impression or the feeling or perception that they get picked on? Are there lots of ways that your power has been constrained? By regulations, policies, and whatnot. I mean, I'm looking around the room, and I know there's more than one of you that had a board of education that was a paddle with holes drilled in it in the principal's office. Those still happen? No. Okay. So we don't exercise our superiority and control in the same ways, you know, how we're socially allowed to express certain things changes over time. Okay. And it's not okay to, you know, hit somebody over the head with your control and power anymore. Okay. The fourth pair there is neutrality and empathy. Neutrality is kind of a an I don't care sort of response, you know. And there are lots of different ways that we feel sometimes that people don't care. Okay. So maybe it's a letter of the law issue, like, well, strictly speaking, this is the policy, and this is where a lot of our zero tolerance stuff is taken to us. You know, goes. There's no accounting for the individual circumstances. Nope. Okay. It's a response to being fair, right? But what it's taken out of the equation sometimes is the role of empathy. You know, if you get hit with the hammer hard for making a mistake, what do you learn?
Get out of the way of the hammer.
Yeah, stay away from that hammer. Okay, does it change behaviors, or does it make them, you know, kind of go underground a little bit? Okay, so, you know, some of our well-intentioned strategies can actually inhibit our ability to accomplish more satisfying, personally satisfying responses. Okay, but education is one place where standardization rules, right? You know, we gotta have a rubric and standard for everything, right? So it's really hard sometimes to deal with things on an individual case level. So we need to pay attention to where our constraints come from. You know, are we making them up? Are they imposed on us? Where do they come from? And how do they affect what we are able to do in our relationships with one another, with our students, with our communities, and so on. Okay. Certainty and provisionalism. Certainty is know-it-all behaviors. You know anybody who knows it all? Anybody? Know a know-it-all? How nice for them. Okay. Or a one-upper, right? I know more than you do. I not only know it all, I know it all better than you do, right? How pleasant, right? Do you say, oh boy, I'm glad that person is in my life to educate and inform me? No. Yeah, I mean, some of those people we have no choice about, right? They're, you know, they're our boss, they're our, you know, our neighbor, they're our family, and so forth. But generally, we are not attracted to people who exercise that style of interpersonal relating very much. You know, I know it all, I know everything. Provisionalistic behaviors are a little more investigative, saying, well, you know, I think about it this way, but I'm willing to check out your perspective. Okay, what does that do? That shares power a little bit, for one thing, which meets a need, right? No, it implies that both people in a decision have agency in the sense that they can participate in a negotiation of what things mean. Okay, so you know, somebody who tells me, oh, that's not bullying, you haven't been bullied. Do kids ever hear that? That's a certainty behavior. It makes them feel like their feelings aren't real, okay? Which does what? Might shut them up. How convenient, right? Does it address a problem very well, though? No, okay? So, you know, we get into this profession. I mean, we're not here for the big bucks, right? You know, we're here, usually people are in this profession because they're called to it, right? And part of that calling is developing healthy relationships with students and helping them develop healthy relationships with other people. You know, I mean, that's one of the most satisfying parts of my career is being involved with students at this critical point in their lives where, you know, where they're choosing what path they take from here. It's very cool to teach college. Okay. The other reason I'm not doing K through 12 is I couldn't do all the, all the regulations, the rules and stuff. I had a lot more freedom teaching in college than I know a lot of you do who are really in the trenches, right? And that's part of the reason I study this stuff. If I can help you help students before they get to me, we'll all be happier, right? Okay, the final pair is strategy and spontaneity. If I'd have been Jack Gibb, I would have renamed these. I'm not real happy about these names. The strategy one I like because we get strategy. Strategy is behaviors which are manipulative, imply some sort of hidden agenda. Okay, let me give you an example. When I was 16, and I know that's a long time ago. When I was 16, but it's a vivid example that still sticks with me. Okay, I had a huge crush on a guy in my history class, and I had history right before lunch. And this guy, I mean, I wrote his name on my notebook. It was bad. Okay, I had it bad. I think he knew it. Sort of transparent. Okay, so after history class one day, he says, what are you doing for lunch? Come sit at my table. Woohoo! Right? I have arrived. I walked about this high off the ground. I could hardly eat because I was all nervous and everything. I was so excited to be seen with him in the cafeteria. It was a very cool moment for me. And during this lunch hour, he says to me, "What are you doing Saturday night?" And I think, "Thank you, fairy godmother," right? Because what do I think? He's going to ask me out, finally, right? He's going to ask me out. And I say nothing. I'm thinking to myself, I'm not doing anything Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. I'm yours, right? And he says, good, because Carol has a babysitting job that she can't get out of, and I want to take her out. Can you babysit? Now, at 16, I was not equipped to say no, much less hell no, right? And I babysat, right? Actually, if you're familiar with the kick to dog theory, those kids are lucky. I was humiliated, okay? I felt like I had been forced to do something that, broke my heart, okay? Now, I'm over 20 years from that moment, okay? Actually, I'm really far from that moment, okay? But I still remember it, all right? And the reason I remember it was because of the very strong emotions that were associated with being played that way, all right? Actually, I had it bad enough for him that he probably could have gone to the supportive side and said, "Hey, Melanie, I need a favor." And I'd probably have done that then, too, and then the kids wouldn't have been at risk so much, right? I probably wouldn't remember it today. I definitely wouldn't be using them as an example. There's a part of me that smiles every time I use this example because I think, right? People remember how they're treated. People remember their strong emotional responses. And sometimes, my parents didn't think that was a very big deal, but it was to me, okay? And I have to admit, there's a little part of me, maybe a little bigger than that, that takes great satisfaction in going back to my class reunions and seeing that this guy is bald, fat, and his wife is ugly. Now, I'm not a mean person, but I do like that. Why? Karma, right? People remember how we treat them, okay? And it's not always easy to make choices that we're proud of, okay? But it's important, even when it's difficult, or even when it's not so difficult for us, to remember how difficult it is for somebody else, particularly somebody who's a lot younger than we are, to address some of these relational issues that can take us to the dark side of interpersonal communication, where life itself is threatened. When kids don't feel that life is worth continuing because of some of these hateful relational messages, we have a big problem. Okay? And we have to take steps to use whatever tools we can, okay? And ideas like these are tools to make it better. Okay? Thank you for your attention. I have about 5 minutes for questions, if anybody has any questions. Okay, well, we are caught up with our schedule now, so you have some time to get to your next panel. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.